Okay, short and sweet. I'm just going to walk you through the basic steps of how we're going to create the what lies beneath project. So this is the after. I actually have two versions of after available. Um, it could look like this, or it could look like this. You could actually bend back the photograph in any direction. So let's start back from the beginning and where this all started from. So here is the picture of a lake and how we began. And actually, this is not exactly where we began. We started with this photo, the unedited photo. So the first thing that you'll need to do is prepare this to be ready to become this document that's 8.5 by 11 and has this nice white border around it. So the first thing that I did is take my original document and I need to crop it to 8.5 by 11. So if I click the crop tool, I can choose a preset as an 8.5 by 11. You could just type it in here as well. You want to make sure that you are letter size, so that'll be 8.5 by 11, either horizontally or vertical, and then 300 resolution. So whichever direction is making sense for your document. And then say OK. And look, I've managed to mess it up. So here, let's try that again. So we're going to do 8.5 wide by 11. Not a big deal. So then decide where you want this to be in your document. What part do you want to crop, depending on the size of your original. Push Enter to crop it, and we're good. So now it's just trying to crop again because I'm on that tool. So if I click off of the tool, that'll go away. And then I need to create the border. I'm going to do it now because I want that border to follow with all the other layers that I make. So I'm going to go to Image and Canvas Size. And if I click the relative box and now make this 1/2 inch wide and 1/2 inch tall and make the canvas extension white, what that's going to do is add a 1/4 inch border all the way around. So we'll say OK, and look, beautiful. So from this point, I would be ready to just duplicate the layer. And you do want to double click this background and call it something else, and then now you can edit here. So now this top layer is going to be the one that's going to peel back, and the bottom layer is the one that we're going to do stuff to. So I'm going to return back to my actual document and walk through there. So here's that original bottom layer. Here is an extra version of it. So I'm going to show you how. I'm going to move it on up here. I'm going to show you how I did that bend in a minute. But before we get there, I chose to make this background snowy. What you choose to do with the bottom is totally up to you, and I actually have some choices here. So let's look at the bent photograph without the gray covering it up. So I have a snowy version back there. I could change and play with the hue, or maybe an inversion filter, whatever you want to do. Okay, so we have a whole Pinterest board of ideas. You need to do something to the bottom. As long as you're having fun, as long as you're being neat and you're trying something new, anything is fair game. So let's talk about how we got from this, our straight flat copy, okay, to having it bent. So here is the layer that I have underneath. I've done something to edit this scene and whatever picture. So it doesn't matter to me what picture you're using. Find something suitable. But you know, if you want to play with fire, do that. If you want to make something look illustrated, do that. Doesn't matter on my side. So I have my snowy one. So now I have my copy of the lake. Okay, same border. And now we're going to go ahead and transform this. So to get from here to here, I'm going to use free transform and I'm going to warp. So back to my non-warped one. Go to edit and free transform. And then up here at the top, this is the warp symbol. I need this in order to get this to pull back. Okay, so I'm going to click here. It's going to add my warp grid. All right. You can pull from any direction. All right. So, and frankly, I would experiment with this a little bit. So it might not hurt before you do this to have made a copy. Okay. You can undo at this point. But grab a corner, click, and drag. And it's going to pull. Fun. Now, if you notice, if I do all this far, okay, these are still hanging out here. So I've got this kind of really strange triangle happening there. That's probably a little more than you want. You want to find a happy middle ground between seeing the original and seeing what's underneath there. I can move these handles. This is going to affect how far it comes up. I can also talk about the grids in here. So you want the rest of the grid to be pretty perpendicular, so there's not a lot of distortion for the rest of the photograph. You don't want it to look like it's been distorted through here, but I want it to come and bend up here. I could take 2 if I want and have both of them come up. This is entirely up to you, and I would experiment a second and see what makes sense for you. Okay. When you're happy, go ahead and push enter, and now here is your transformed new version on top. Okay. If you notice though, it's putting that photograph, that image, actually on the back side of this, and that's a little less believable in a photograph. It wouldn't look like this back there. So I do want to cover that up. And so what I did is I made a new layer, okay, and then returned to the snowy one, the one that I've got. Actually, it's not really even snowy. I should call this just lake, okay. And we could do this in any kind of way. So this layer, if I hide everything else, okay, this layer stops right here. You can see the transparent grid, okay. So I need to make a selection that's right here, this triangle. The problem is it's not really a clear shape, so it's a little tricky to figure out. So I'm going to try my quick selection tool and see if we can draw a selection, and that's really pretty reasonable. Now that I have that triangle, okay, this shape here, I'm going to go to the new layer that I've made, and I'm going to make a fill. So we could use a paintbrush, we could fill. You just need to pick a color. It can be anything. I picked a gray. Once you've made this a color though, changing the color won't be a big deal. So we're going to make this a bigger brush, and I'm just going to paint right on here. So actually my opacity's down, so let's fix that. We're going to cover that up. Now if I deselect by Control D, that actually is not too bad, but you can see that there's actually, like, the edge is not as clean as it could be. And so one thing that you might want to consider doing, if I reselect that area, you can do a modification of the selection where you actually expand it. And you could decide how many pixels. Remember, a pixel is not very big. Okay, so maybe 3 to 5 pixels. We're going to expand that selection, which doesn't look a whole lot different right now, but what that does is just make it a little bit bigger so that when I draw on top of it, it's going to cover all of those edges. All right. So depending on your situation, you might have some cleaning up to do. Okay. So on my document, I definitely had a little bit where I needed to come in and manually clean and add. And right there, I'm on a far too fuzzy brush. So let's go sharper on that, and we can clean up. So, but because this is on its own layer, I'm going to be able to erase or edit or do whatever I need to do. Okay, because it's not actually on the document behind there. So I would take a second and make sure that you're being neat about that step, because I think it makes a big difference there. All right, so that's just covering up that background. Now I have the snow underneath there. We're doing pretty well. Nice thing about this being its own layer is you could decide how it interacts. So if I wanted some of the picture to show through, I could use some options. The last thing I think that makes a nice difference here is to add a drop shadow. Okay, so if we look at the one I did for real, you can see this little shadow around here. I think that makes a big difference about making this paper look like it's on top of your document. So I'm going to take my top photograph layer and come up here to the layer palette options and go to blending options. Down here at the bottom, drop shadow, you need to click on the word so that you can edit. You can decide the angle, decide how far away, how fuzzy it is, and how big. Okay, so figure out what settings make sense. Generally, multiply is the right direction for that. And when you're happy with it, say OK. And then that's pretty much all there is to that. One of the nice things about this is once you've set up this document, it is not really a big deal to continue to try other things. So right here I have the snow, but having some other kind of background is really pretty easy to add because I've got that solid layer back behind it. We're going to save it, make a JPEG for me, and turn it into graphics when you're done. That's about it.